Welcome back everyone. I'm pretty sure nobody really cares about the iPhone 4S anymore, especially in the later part of 2020, but your boy has to review it. I mean, if I don't, who else is going to do it? So let's go ahead and see how this specific iPhone holds up a full over 9 years later. I mean, this thing is an insane machine. Hopefully I don't take more than 10 minutes to talk about this thing because not a lot has changed. But if you guys remember last year, this thing was popping back up in the news again because Apple randomly released another iOS version for the iPhone 4S. I think it was like iOS 9.3.6 or something. And that was something that totally changed my life forever. Okay, I'm totally joking, but that was like a really insane thing that Apple did at that time. And can you believe I'm coming up with this stuff right off the spot? I didn't write a script or anything. Now, this iPhone, like I stated, came out over 9 years ago, which is insane. And body-wise, Apple actually took some cues back from this thing, more specifically the iPhone 4, but it's still pretty insane that Apple went out and released a phone that kind of took some cues with this thing in 2020, aka the iPhone 12, because of those flat sides. I mean, that came from the iPhone 4, which the iPhone 4S also had, and that's something that's really, really impressive. Apple was right about it back then, and they're definitely right about it right now. So I think that's pretty much the main thing with the iPhone 12, to be honest. That's like the best feature about it. But on the front of the iPhone 4S, you have that 3.5-inch IPS panel, which I think at that time was really impressive. And even thinking back now, I mean, this was like a solid phone back then. And thinking about it now, like imagine somebody using this phone still. I'm sure there's still some people who use it, but that's few and far between. I don't think there's a lot of people using it right now. And that's something that's super impressive, that Apple was able to make a phone back then that feels as premium as this thing, that was as premium as this thing. And it still holds up when you hold this thing and you feel it. It still looks and feels extremely good, which is something I really do like about these devices. Now, you have a lot of bezel around it. I want to argue that probably the amount of bezel on this phone is bigger than the screen itself, which, that's kind of funny to say. And you do have that home button on the front, which Apple is still making on some phones with the iPhone SE 2 and apparently with the iPhone SE 2 Plus whenever that comes out. So those things are super, super interesting to me. On the bottom, you have that 30-pin connector, the old one, basically the original iPhone charger, which I think is pretty funny. And on the back, you have that glass back, and that is so important for me to say. Apple went from a period, I think from like after this phone, the iPhone 5, it didn't have a full glass back. It had a little bit of glass on the top and bottom, and we didn't get another glass back iPhone until the iPhone 8, 8 Plus, and iPhone 10. So they went several years without another glass back. This was the last glass back iPhone for many years, which is very insane to me. So the build quality of this iPhone was insane. And I would argue it was probably one of the best built iPhones ever. When you still hold this thing, it feels so good. And the fact that it came out in 2011, I can't think of a lot of devices that are 9 years old that hold up as well as this thing. I mean, I just can't think of like that many. I'm trying to think. It's just so crazy. Like I think of a lot of tablets back in 2011, a lot of phones that came back in 2011. I think like the Note 2 came out then, and like the Galaxy S2. This phone completely demolished all those phones just based off the build quality, let alone the software updates, which this thing just got last year. So on top of that glass back, you do have that single camera setup, which is an 8 megapixel sensor, which is pretty impressive. So you can go ahead and shoot 1080p videos on it, which back in 2011, I'm sure that was like 5K resolution at 300,000 frames per second. So that was a really good type of capability this phone had at the time. Now, obviously, I don't think anybody's planning on using this camera anymore, but it still has that capability, which I think is really impressive. So for a lot of people out there, the fact that this thing has a camera is pretty cool. And on the front, you do have that VGA camera, which I think is like 0.3 megapixels or something. I don't remember exactly what type of thing VGA is, but basically a lot of people are using that for FaceTime because the iPhone 4 did bring FaceTime capability, I believe, and that was the first iPhone to bring that front-facing camera. And with this iPhone, you not only had that front-facing camera, but you had FaceTime, and you had a lot of other capability that the iPhone 4S had. And I think that's really impressive when you look at a lot of other phones back in the day. A lot of them were skimping out on a lot of features, and the iPhone 4 and 4S had a lot of features at the end of the day. It's kind of funny because Apple's kind of doing the opposite. They're kind of skimping out of features now and slowly releasing them as we go on. So I think the camera on this thing, obviously it doesn't hold up in today's standards, but the fact that it still takes photos, it still takes videos, and it still even turns on is super impressive in my opinion. And I think that's something that a lot of people should give this phone credit for, the fact that it even turns on and takes photos at the end of the day. So in terms of the camera and in terms of everything, that pretty much covers it up. Software wise, again, this phone probably is completely outdated. I mean, iOS 9 came out a couple of years ago and that's the most recent version. But like I said before, it got that security update, which I found super impressive. When you look at a lot of other devices, after like 2-3 years, they're done with software support. They're not getting any more software support after that. But this phone has that type of capability. Once you go ahead and install software on this thing, even after like a while this thing was unsupported, it randomly got an update out of nowhere, which was very insane to me. So that in and of itself was super impressive. And that just made the iPhone 4S it just made me sparkle of joy when that happened. I just felt so like happy for some reason when this phone randomly got that. And the fact that I think it's been over a year since that happened and I'm still talking about it is super insane to me. So shout out to Apple for doing that. I think it was just a super awesome thing. And hopefully they do more things like that. If this phone randomly got an update today, I'd randomly like cry. So in terms of software, that pretty much covers it up there. Performance wise, I mean, there's not really too much to say here. I mean, this thing has that Apple A5 chip inside of it, dual core CPU, and 0.5 GB of RAM. So definitely not the most amount of RAM ever, but it's definitely not like a super small amount of RAM. I mean, it has some type of capability, but I think at the end of the day, you're probably going to be better off if you get a device that has at least like 1 gig of RAM, like the iPhone 5 or 5S or something. But still, at that time, it could do everything it, needed to do. I mean, this thing originally, when it first came out with iOS 5. So when you think about it like that, it probably didn't need the most amount of, resources to run that specific software. I think the iOS 9 update came out when the iPhone 6S came out, and that had 2 gigs of RAM. So definitely it had some pretty big improvements there. But regardless, what I can tell you is performance-wise, it still turns on and it still does the job, but it's very, very slow and it's very choppy. I think the jump, honestly, from the 4S to the 5 really made some huge improvements in the performance sector. I think that Apple A6 chip that the iPhone 5 had, or whatever it was called, was definitely a humongous improvement for sure. That thing had a ton of capability, and I could probably, if I needed to, still use an iPhone 5. I would not like the experience at all. But with the 4S, it's definitely not fast, it's not smooth, but it's still pretty functional. When you look at a lot of, Android 11, when you look at a lot of 2011 devices from Android, I mean, I don't know, like it seems pretty average. It's not like anything super crazy in my opinion. So in terms of the specific performance sector, that pretty much covers it up. There's not a lot to hit on. I think it's good enough, and I don't want to like bash this phone too much. So performance wise, that's kind of where I would leave it. And battery life, I mean, I guess if we're going to go there, I mean, the battery life on this thing isn't that great anymore. It did have a 1,432 mAh battery, which is pretty impressive because I think the iPhone 6S battery life was only like a couple hundred milliamp bigger than this thing. So I don't really understand what Apple was thinking about with that thing too, but I think regardless, this specific phone had an okay battery life at the time, I'm sure. But I think this phone, was it this one that had the cell signal issues? I honestly don't remember, but there was an iPhone that had the cell signal issue and didn't have anything to do with the battery life, but there was a very funny response from Steve Jobs. But to kind of sum up this whole entire video and to answer the question, should you even pick up an iPhone 4S in the later part of 2020? Obviously no, that's just a given, but think about what this phone has done for the whole entire culture and for the whole entire movement of iPhone. I mean, when this thing first came out in 2011, I remember so many people talking about it. I barely even knew what technology was at the time, but I literally loved this phone. And like I said, I didn't even know that much about it. I didn't know that much about iPhones back in 2011, but that was a very impressive thing of Apple's marketing that somebody like me even knew it at that time. And that was like, this was the best phone of that year. And the fact that we are still talking about it, at least I'm still talking about it, is super insane to me that there's still this much of a voice for sure. And I don't think this is the best phone. I don't think this phone has the most amount of features or anything from 2011. I think if you're able to get a 2011 phone and custom ROM it, that would be really cool. But I think where this phone holds up now is a relic. This phone is really awesome and, where it was at the time and how it holds up now. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's searching up this phone. But it's a really cool, important just history lesson. But it's a really cool relic in the whole entire history of just technology in general. And I really do like it. And I think that's pretty much how I'd sum this whole entire video. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.